From the time we sit in school classrooms, most of us are taught that the Earth is an almost perfect sphere, composed of multiple layers stacked in a clear and stable order. On the outside lies the fragile crust where humans live. Beneath it stretches the mantle, thousands of kilometers thick, followed by the molten outer core and the solid inner core at the center. This diagram appears in textbooks, in scientific lectures, and in the collective understanding of modern society as an established truth. We have grown so accustomed to this image that we rarely question it. In common thinking, the Earth is an almost entirely solid body, where everything obeys physical laws that modern science has already described with considerable completeness. What lies deep beneath the surface is assumed to leave no room for life, let alone the existence of an advanced civilization. Temperatures are too high, pressures are overwhelming, the environment is extreme. Everything seems to close off every possibility from the outset. Yet it is precisely at this seemingly obvious point that a critical question begins to emerge. Is what we have long believed truly the whole truth? Is the Earth really completely solid in the way we imagine? Or is that merely the most reasonable model that current science can construct based on still very limited data? The reality is that, despite humanity's extraordinary technological achievements, our direct knowledge of the Earth's interior remains extremely sparse. The deepest borehole ever drilled by humans reaches just over 12 kilometers, an impressive figure at first glance, yet in truth it barely scratches the thin skin of a planet with a radius of more than 6,300 kilometers. Everything beyond that, comprising almost the entire volume of the Earth, lies outside the reach of direct human observation. All the models of Earth's internal structure that we use today are inferred indirectly, from seismic waves, from material density, from the magnetic field, and from physical calculations. These are rigorous scientific inferences, but in the end they are still models, not direct observation. And throughout the history of science, there has been no shortage of models once believed to be absolute truths, only to be replaced when new data emerged. What is even more thought-provoking is that while our understanding of the Earth remains full of gaps, humanity has devoted most of its intellectual and technological resources to looking outward. We send probes beyond the solar system, photograph galaxies billions of light years away, and search for signs of life on Mars or on exoplanets. The desire to explore the cosmos is noble and justified. Yet a quiet paradox persists. We know more about the surface of the moon than about the depths directly beneath our feet. Perhaps this is because the Earth feels too familiar. It is always here, every day, making it easy for humans to assume that we already understand it. But history consistently shows that the most familiar things often conceal the deepest mysteries. Before the discovery of microorganisms, the microscopic world was entirely invisible. Before plate tectonics, the Earth's surface was considered immutable. Every major advance in knowledge begins with questioning what everyone knows. And from that very doubt, a controversial yet compelling concept begins to edge into the margins of scientific and philosophical awareness. The idea of a world existing beneath the Earth's surface. Not merely natural caves or complex geological systems, but a vast space with its own structure, one that could even sustain life and an independent civilization. For thousands of years, many cultures across the world, despite having no direct contact with one another, have shared strange stories of an underground kingdom. It is described as a world separated from sunlight, inhabited by beings possessing superior knowledge and power. Sometimes it is a divine realm, sometimes a refuge of ancient civilizations, and sometimes a hidden paradise. Among the many names associated with this idea, one stands out as a symbol of it all: Agartha. According to legends and hypotheses, Agartha is not merely a city, but the center of a vast world deep within the earth. A place said to have its own light, its own ecosystem, and a civilization far more advanced than that of humanity on the surface. What makes Agartha especially intriguing is not only its mystery, but the fact that its story does not originate from a single source. It appears in different forms in mythology, in ancient records, in explorers' accounts, and even in fringe scientific hypotheses. Any one story might be dismissed as fantasy, but when placed side by side, the repetition of the same motif becomes a profound question mark. Is this merely a coincidence of human imagination? Or could it be that behind these myths lies an ancient memory, distorted by time, yet never completely erased? This introduction does not seek to assert that Agartha is real, nor does it deny what modern science has built. It does only one thing: it opens a crack in our certainty, a reminder that perhaps the Earth, the home we believe we understand, still hides depths that humanity has only just begun to touch with its curiosity. And if Agartha is only a myth, then it is a myth that has endured in a strangely persistent way. But if it is more than a myth, then the next question becomes far more unsettling. What exactly are we living on the surface of? When modern humans mention Agartha, the first reaction is usually skepticism. A vast city hidden deep beneath the earth sounds more like a product of imagination than a serious hypothesis. Yet the strange thing is this: Agartha is not a single idea that emerged in modern times. On the contrary, traces of it, under many different names, have existed in humanity's collective memory for thousands of years. Before science described the Earth through material layers and seismic data, ancient people tried to explain the world through myth. And within those myths, the concept of an underworld was far from rare. In fact, it appeared with remarkable frequency, spanning Asia, the Americas, the Middle East, and Africa. In ancient India, religious texts speak of Patala, a world lying beneath the Earth's surface. Patala is not depicted as a dark hell, but as a fertile realm with rivers, mountains, and beings of superior intelligence. In some interpretations, Patala is even considered more beautiful than the human world, where light does not come from the sun, but from its own inner source. In Mesoamerica, the Maya spoke of Xibalba, while the Aztecs told of their ancestors once living in 7 deep caves beneath the earth before emerging onto the surface. These caves were not merely temporary shelters, but the birthplace of a civilization. They were seen as gateways connecting 2 worlds, one above, one below. What is striking is that in these stories, the underworld is not portrayed as a realm of lesser beings. On the contrary, it is often a place of knowledge, of gods, or of entities with great power. In Sumerian, Babylonian, and Akkadian mythology, the world below is the domain of deities who govern fate, where the lives and deaths of humans on the surface are decided. Even in Chinese culture, the concept of the underworld, ruled by King Yama, did not originally carry a purely punitive meaning. It was a mirror world of the surface, with its own order, laws, and administrative system. Only later, as religions became more strongly moralized, did the image of hell gradually become terrifying in popular consciousness. At first glance, these legends might be explained simply as products of humanity's fear of darkness, caves, and death. But that explanation begins to falter when we ask another question. Why did civilizations with no direct contact describe such a remarkably similar motif? They all speak of a world beneath the earth, a superior civilization or powerful beings, separation from surface humanity, an ancient connection between the two worlds. Such similarities are difficult to dismiss as pure coincidence. In mythological studies, when a symbol recurs across multiple independent cultures, it often reflects a shared human experience, or at least a collective memory deeply embedded in the human psyche. Some scholars argue that this is a memory of a time when humans lived in caves, or a metaphor for a spiritual journey inward. This symbolic interpretation has value, but it fails to explain a crucial detail. In many stories, the underworld is not merely symbolic, but is described with specific geography, clear entrances, and even routes connecting it to the Earth's surface. In Tibet, the concept of Shambhala appears as a hidden kingdom inhabited by enlightened beings. Shambhala is neither entirely on the surface nor wholly metaphysical. It is said to exist on a difficult-to-access plane, revealed only to those who are ready. Notably, many descriptions place Shambhala deep within mountain ranges or beneath the earth. From Patala, Sibalba, and Shambhala to Agartha, these different names may simply be cultural facets of a single larger idea, a parallel world existing within the very planet humans inhabit. Over time, that idea came to be gathered under one name, Agartha, as a unifying symbol for all these legends. What sets Agartha apart from typical notions of an otherworld is that it is not located beyond the earth, not part of the realm of the dead, and not entirely supernatural. In many descriptions, Agartha is a physical world, with cities, architecture, technology, and society. The difference is that it is hidden from ordinary human perception. If we dismiss these legends as pure fantasy, we must accept that humanity, across many different historical periods, independently imagined almost the same structure of reality. If not, then the alternative is more unsettling. Perhaps these stories are remnants of an ancient knowledge, fragmented and distorted by time, yet never fully erased. Part 2 offers no definitive answers. It simply lays the groundwork for a dangerous yet compelling thought. Agartha is not a single story, but a recurring motif throughout human history. And when an idea survives for thousands of years, crossing barriers of language, culture, and geography, perhaps it deserves more serious consideration than that of a mere myth. If Part 1 planted doubt about what we know of the Earth, Part 2 reveals that this doubt is not new. It has accompanied humanity since the dawn of civilization. And from here the question is no longer does Agartha exist, but rather, why have humans, everywhere and in every era, never stopped telling stories about it? If Agartha existed only in ancient mythology, it could easily be relegated to the realm of symbols and metaphors. What makes this story far more complex, however, is the appearance of modern witnesses, real individuals with names, historical context, and personal histories, who claim that they directly encountered a world beneath the Earth's surface. It is here that Agartha begins to leave the safe territory of myth and enter a far more dangerous domain: personal testimony. In both science and history, personal testimony is always a double-edged sword. It can be a fragment of truth, but it can also be an illusion, a distorted memory, or a subjective interpretation of an extreme experience. One of the central figures of this phase is Mariana, a Swedish spiritual practitioner. According to her accounts, during many years of deep meditation, she made contact with entities that did not belong to the surface world of Earth. At first, these experiences were vague and purely spiritual, but eventually, one contact became far clearer and more consistent than the rest. That entity identified itself as coming from Agartha. Mariana did not claim to see Agartha with her physical eyes. What she described was a non-physical form of contact in which information was transmitted directly as images, sensations, and knowledge. For many people, this is precisely where the story loses credibility. Yet for those who study altered states of consciousness, such phenomena cannot be dismissed through ridicule alone. The story, however, truly enters a different realm when Mariana is no longer the only figure involved. Through a method she described as directed connection, Mariana began receiving information from an individual who claimed to have once been a human living on the Earth's surface. His name was Tim. According to the recorded accounts, Tim was an American citizen living in Seattle in the 1960s. His life was entirely ordinary until a maritime accident changed everything. During a cargo voyage, his ship was caught in a violent storm and capsized. He fell into the water, a near unconscious state, believing death was imminent. But Tim did not die. He said he was pulled up by some force, whether human or mechanical, he could not tell. When he regained consciousness, he realized he was on a small vessel moving through a long tunnel, illuminated by a kind of light unlike any he had known before. It was not artificial lighting nor sunlight. It was a soft, evenly diffused glow that filled the space without casting shadows. When the vessel stopped, Tim stepped into a world he had never seen in his life. Circular, roofless buildings stood before him, constructed from a marble-like material that emitted its own light. The streets were golden in color, clean and silent. The air was not suffocating nor hot as he had imagined the Earth's interior would be. On the contrary, it was strangely pleasant. In the distance, tall structures rose like palaces, yet without any sense of grandeur or oppression. The first person Tim spoke with was a white-haired man, wearing long garments reminiscent of medieval Europe. His face was calm, his gaze lacking the curiosity one would expect when confronting a stranger. It was this man who told Tim that the place he was standing in was Agartha, the inner world of the Earth. What frightened Tim most was not the strange scenery, but the thought that he might never return. He immediately expressed his desire to go back to the surface world, where his family and life still awaited him. The white-haired man agreed, but on one condition. Tim had to carry a message about the existence of Agartha back to the outside world. Before leaving, Tim was given a small object, a whistle. He was told that humans on the surface would not be able to hear its sound, but those living in the inner world could. If one day Tim wished to return, he needed only to blow the whistle. When Tim emerged from the tunnel, he found himself at the foot of Mount Shasta, California. Time appeared to have passed in an abnormal way. The ship he had been on was officially listed as lost, and the entire crew was presumed dead. Tim's return alone was something no one could explain. He told his story to neighbors, journalists, and anyone willing to listen. The response he received was skepticism. To modern society, Tim's account sounded no different from the words of someone who had suffered severe psychological trauma. Disillusioned, Tim turned to the one person he believed would not judge him: his grandmother, who lived in Sweden. Unexpectedly, she not only believed him, but revealed that she herself had once been a spiritual practitioner. It was she who helped Tim connect with Mariana, the woman who later recorded the entire experience in her book about Agartha. Here, the story reaches a point that cannot be easily avoided. If all of this were fabrication, why are the details so consistent? Why do the locations, architectural descriptions, the nature of the light, the people, and even Agartha's attitude of non-intervention align so closely with ancient legends? Of course, there is no physical evidence strong enough to confirm the accounts of Tim or Mariana, but history shows that many major discoveries began as stories dismissed as delusions. The difference is that when scientific data is insufficient, humanity is forced into an uncomfortable choice: to reject the claims entirely or to suspend judgment. Part 3 does not ask the listener to believe. It does only one thing. It places Agartha into a modern context, where real people were willing to risk their reputation and their sanity to describe an experience no one wanted to hear. And from that moment on, Agartha is no longer merely a story of distant mythology. It becomes a living, haunting question that has never been fully answered. If these people were not lying, then where did they go? When personal stories about Agartha are told, the familiar reaction of the scientific community is caution. History has taught us that testimony, no matter how sincere, cannot replace empirical evidence. What is intriguing, however, is that the idea of a world inside the earth did not originate with spiritual practitioners, but was once proposed by some of the greatest scientific minds in human history. The hollow Earth hypothesis, or more precisely, a collection of hypotheses about a hollow internal structure of the planet, emerged in the 17th century. In 1692, the astronomer and mathematician Edmund Halley, the discoverer of the comet that bears his name, put forward a shocking idea for his time. The Earth might consist of several concentric shells, separated by hollow spaces. According to Halley, such layers could explain anomalies in Earth's magnetic field that contemporary science was unable to account for. Notably, Halley was no dreamer. He was among the most serious scientists of his era, and he was not alone. In the early stages, even Isaac Newton, the icon of classical science, considered the possibility that the Earth's interior structure was not as simple as a single, solid mass. During the 18th and 19th centuries, the hypothesis was further developed by figures such as John Cleves Symmes Jr., who publicly declared that the Earth was hollow and possessed large openings at both poles. Symmes did not merely write about the idea, he actively lobbied the U.S. government to fund expeditions in search of entrances to the inner world. Although widely mocked, he succeeded in capturing public attention and the interest of a segment of the academic community. At that time, science lacked the tools to completely dismiss the idea. Seismic waves were not yet well understood. Deep drilling technology was primitive, and much of humanity's understanding of the Earth relied more on inference than on direct observation. In that context, the hollow Earth hypothesis was not as crazy as it would later come to be seen. One argument often cited in support of the hypothesis concerned the Earth's mass and density. Some early researchers believed that if the Earth were entirely solid, with a composition similar to its crust, its mass would be significantly greater than what measurements indicated. This led many to ask, could there be empty spaces within the Earth that reduce its average density? Magnetic anomalies were another contentious point. The fact that the magnetic North Pole is not fixed, but drifts over time, was once interpreted as evidence of a complex internal structure. Some scientists even suggested that the magnetic poles might be related to hollow spaces or independently moving internal layers. However, as geophysics advanced in the 20th century, especially after scientists learned to analyze seismic waves from earthquakes, the picture of the Earth became far clearer. Modern models show that the Earth has a liquid outer core, a solid inner core, and a mantle thousands of kilometers thick. These data appear to leave no room for a hollow space large enough to contain a civilization. It is precisely here that the hollow Earth hypothesis enters into direct confrontation with mainstream science. Critics point out that if the Earth were hollow, surface gravity could not have its current value. Ordinary matter could not hang as a shell, thousands of kilometers thick without collapsing inward. Moreover, the increase of temperature and pressure with depth are phenomena confirmed through multiple independent methods. Supporters of the hypothesis, however, have not remained entirely silent. They argue that all current geological models are based on indirect inference. Humans have never directly seen the Earth's core. Seismic waves, though extremely useful, provide information about changes in density and physical states, not direct images. They also raise an uncomfortable question. Is science perhaps too confident in its models? History contains many moments when scientific frameworks once thought complete later collapsed in the face of new data. The belief that we understand the Earth well enough may itself be an illusion of knowledge. More intriguingly, some modern versions of the hollow Earth hypothesis no longer claim that the planet's interior is completely empty. Instead, they propose the existence of large, stable cavities embedded within the mantle, similar to bubbles that form in metal as it solidifies. These cavities could, in theory, exist without compromising the planet's overall structure. At this point, Agartha is no longer imagined as a naive, giant city at the center of the Earth. It becomes a more subtle hypothesis, an isolated ecosystem, shielded from the surface by hundreds or even thousands of kilometers of rock, and connected to the outside world only through rare passages. Modern science does not accept this hypothesis, but it also cannot prove in absolute terms that it is impossible in every conceivable scenario. And in science, the realm of the not yet disproven is the most dangerous place for human certainty. Part 4 does not seek to overturn modern geology. It clarifies only one crucial reality. The boundary between what is known and what is unknown remains vast. At this stage, Agartha does not stand opposite science as an enemy, but exists as a question suspended at the edge of knowledge. And when science cannot decisively close that door, the stories that follow, from expeditions and military files to sealed secrets, begin to step inside. If the hollow Earth hypothesis was once dismissed as mere speculation by scholars of earlier centuries, the 20th century placed it in an entirely different context, one of military operations large-scale expeditions, and classified documents, and no name is more closely associated with this phase than Admiral Richard Evelyn Byrd, one of the most renowned Arctic and Antarctic explorers in United States history. Byrd was not a fringe figure. He was a high-ranking naval officer, a veteran aviator, funded and honored by the U.S. government. His polar expeditions were not personal adventures, but carefully organized operations with clear scientific and strategic objectives. For that reason, anything connected to Byrd cannot easily be dismissed as fantasy. In 1947, just 2 years after the end of World War II, Byrd was appointed to command a massive military scientific mission known as Operation High Jump. The sheer scale of the operation raised eyebrows. More than 4,000 military personnel, dozens of warships, aircraft, and advanced equipment were deployed to Antarctica, a desolate region seemingly devoid of direct military value. The official objectives were to train troops under icy conditions and to establish research bases. Yet the operation ended earlier than planned, with losses that were never clearly explained. Some reports mentioned crashed aircraft, dead sailors, and incidents inconsistent with normal weather conditions. It was within this context that Byrd's personal diaries became the center of controversy. According to copies that circulated years later, Byrd recorded a solo flight deep into the Arctic. In his journal, he described an astonishing phenomenon. His compass malfunctioned, and the frozen terrain gradually gave way to lush green valleys, rivers, forests, and animal species that science claims went extinct millions of years ago. Byrd wrote that he observed disc-shaped, luminous flying objects moving with capabilities far beyond the aviation technology of the time. Shortly thereafter, his aircraft was escorted, not attacked, toward an area described as a vast base located deep within the Earth. There, Byrd was reportedly brought before tall, fair-haired humans who spoke a language blending elements of Nordic and German tongues. They claimed to originate from a world called Aryan, part of the inner world of the Earth. Their technological level, according to the account, far surpassed that of surface humanity. What makes the story striking is not the strange scenery, but the content of the conversation. These beings were said to express deep concern about human behavior, particularly the use of nuclear weapons. The atomic bombs dropped on Japan were not only a catastrophe on the Earth's surface, they claimed, but also a threat to the stability of the inner world. Byrd was then returned to his aircraft and escorted out, with a clear message. Humanity was approaching a dangerous threshold, and the inner world could not remain uninvolved indefinitely. Shortly after this alleged encounter, Byrd was said to have held a closed meeting with the U.S. Department of Defense, and a report was delivered to President Truman. From that point on, all information related to the flight and Byrd's personal notes was reportedly classified. Byrd himself never publicly confirmed or denied what was said to be in his diary. Critics quickly objected, arguing that the circulating diaries were forgeries and that Byrd never made such claims publicly. Supporters, however, posed a different question. If it was all fabrication, why the prolonged silence? That question grows more unsettling when viewed alongside another chapter of history: Nazi Germany and Antarctica. Before the war ended, Germany organized expeditions to Antarctica and claimed territory known as New Swabia. Maps discovered later showed unusual structures and marked regions with no clear explanations. Some testimonies from German naval officers after the war even mentioned an impregnable base at the end of the world. This led to the hypothesis that Operation Highjump was not merely military training, but an effort to locate or neutralize an underground base, possibly linked to discoveries made by Nazi Germany earlier. No official documents confirm this hypothesis, yet no documents adequately explain why such a massive operation ended so abruptly and then faded into silence. Part 5 does not ask readers to believe that Byrd truly met the inhabitants of Agartha. It forces us instead to confront a reality. The polar regions have always been shrouded in secrecy, far exceeding their purely scientific value. And when the military, politics, and exploration converge in one place, the existence of undisclosed truths becomes difficult to deny. Here, Agartha is no longer a myth or an academic hypothesis. It becomes a historical enigma tied to classified files, military operations, and suspicious gaps in the official memory of the 20th century. And if Part 4 asked, could Agartha exist physically? Then Part 5 pushes the question further and into more dangerous territory. If it does exist, who knew and who chose to remain silent? For many decades, science believed that the story of Agartha would gradually be eroded by precise data and increasingly refined models. Yet the paradox is this: the deeper we measure, the more complex the Earth becomes. And modern science itself, rather than closing the door, has inadvertently opened new gaps in our understanding. A major turning point came from seismology. When large earthquakes occur, seismic waves travel through the planet, passing through different layers of matter. By analyzing their speed, direction, and distortion, scientists can see the Earth's internal structure without drilling into its depths. For many years, this method reinforced a relatively clear model of the Earth consisting of crust, mantle, and core. But as data resolution improved, anomalies began to emerge. One of the most striking discoveries is the existence of ultra-low velocity zones, ULVZs, deep within the mantle, near the boundary with the outer core. In these regions, seismic waves slow down in a way that is difficult to explain, as if they were passing through a medium fundamentally different from ordinary hot rock. Initially, ULVZs were interpreted as special magma reservoirs or iron-rich material pockets, yet these models fail to explain all observed characteristics. Some ULVZs are continent-sized, remaining stable over vast geological timescales. They do not migrate like magma, nor do they dissipate like temporary structures. At the same time, science uncovered an even more puzzling phenomenon: large, low-shear velocity. Provinces, LLSVPs, two enormous structures beneath Africa and the Pacific Ocean. Each is nearly continental in scale, rising thousands of kilometers high, with physical properties markedly different from the surrounding mantle. Some geologists refer to them as sunken continents or remnants of ancient tectonic plates dragged deep into the Earth. Yet this explanation is not entirely convincing. LLSVPs appear too stable, too coherent, to be merely chaotic debris of plate tectonics. An uncomfortable question begins to take shape. What allows such massive structures to exist without being crushed or dissolved? Within mainstream science, the usual answer is that we do not yet fully understand mantle dynamics. But for those who follow the Agartha hypothesis, this represents a provocative cognitive gap. If the Earth's interior can host large, stable structures with distinct densities and physical properties, then, at least in principle, Isolated internal spaces are no longer entirely impossible. Meanwhile, 3D seismic imaging and planetary tomography reveal that the Earth is far from uniform. It is a highly stratified system with slow-moving flows, near-stationary material blocks, and regions where temperature, pressure, and chemical composition defy simple models. This forces science to acknowledge an important truth. We have never directly observed the deep mantle. All images are inferential maps, constructed from indirect data, and within those maps, blurred zones remain, areas where the data are insufficient to draw definitive conclusions. Another example fueling debate is the presence of gravitational anomalies recorded in certain regions of the planet. Small but persistent deviations in the gravitational field do not always align neatly with surface geological structures. In some cases, they suggest the presence of unusual masses or voids deep below. Mainstream science explains this through uneven distributions of rock and metal density. Yet once again, that explanation rests on the assumption that no unconventional internal spaces exist within the Earth. Notably, science does not say that such possibilities are impossible. Instead, it says we have no evidence. And in the history of science, the gap between those two statements has often been where revolutions in understanding begin. At this point, Agartha no longer requires stories of giants or glowing cities to persist in the human imagination. It needs only a more modest assumption that the Earth may contain stable, isolated internal regions not yet fully understood. Those regions could be entirely lifeless, or they might not be. What makes the issue sensitive are its implications. If isolated ecosystems exist deep within the Earth, then the history of life on this planet would need to be rewritten. Humanity would no longer be the only intelligent civilization to have emerged on Earth, and certainly not the only one to have influenced the planet's fate. Modern science stands before a paradox. The more clearly we understand the Earth's structure, the more we recognize a complexity far beyond textbook models. And within that complexity, Agartha is no longer a claim, but a possibility, fragile, difficult to prove, yet not entirely dismissible. Part 6 does not declare that science has found Agartha. It clarifies only one sobering thought. What we do not know about the Earth may be far greater than what we do know. And once that realization settles in, the next question becomes unavoidable. If there is a civilization inside the Earth, why would they choose to remain hidden? One of the strongest objections to the Agartha hypothesis does not come from geology or physics, but from behavioral logic. If an advanced civilization exists beneath the Earth's surface, why has it never revealed itself? Why no contact, no intervention, no undeniable traces? The question seems simple, yet it touches the very nature of intelligence, power, and the evolutionary history of civilizations. Throughout human history, whenever two civilizations with vastly different levels of development have come into contact, the outcome has almost always been catastrophic for the weaker one. From the Americas in the age of Columbus to Africa during colonialism, to isolated tribes in the modern Amazon, the arrival of those who know more has rarely been a gift. If Agartha exists and has developed tens or even hundreds of thousands of years before surface humanity, then from their perspective, modern humans may appear as a young, poorly controlled, and extremely dangerous civilization. Dangerous not because of strength, but because of impulsiveness. Humanity has demonstrated its capacity for self-destruction in less than a century since the invention of nuclear energy. We turn technology into weapons faster than into tools of healing. We exploit the planet faster than we understand it, and we often act long before we reflect on the consequences. From that perspective, non-intervention may be a moral choice. Some scholars link this idea to a concept in astronomy, the non-interference principle, often discussed when considering contact with extraterrestrial civilizations. A sufficiently advanced civilization would understand that open contact could disrupt the natural development of a society that is not yet ready. Applied to Earth itself, Agartha, if it exists, may be following a similar principle: observe, do not intervene, and act only when global stability is threatened. This brings us back to the strange details found in accounts from the year 20th century. It may not be a coincidence that stories of an inner world tend to surface after pivotal events, nuclear tests, world wars, or periods of profound global instability. If there is a red line, weapons of mass destruction may be that line. Another, darker hypothesis suggests that Agartha remains hidden not to protect humanity, but to protect itself. In this scenario, humans are not the subjects of observation, they are the source of risk. A civilization living in isolation deep within the Earth may have existed long enough to witness multiple cycles of rise and collapse among surface civilizations. They may have learned that every industrial civilization eventually approaches a threshold of self-destruction. If this is true, Agartha is not a hidden paradise, but the result of withdrawal after catastrophe. A group of survivors who chose to separate from the surface to avoid repeating old mistakes. This hypothesis resonates unsettlingly with another question modern science is struggling with. Did advanced civilizations exist on Earth before us? If prehistoric civilizations once reached high levels of development and then collapsed, Agartha could be the final remnant of a lost age. In that case, their silence would not be mysterious, it would be a painful memory. There is also a third possibility, colder and more pragmatic. Agartha does not need us. A civilization advanced enough to exist in isolation for tens of thousands of years may have long surpassed the need for trade, expansion, or conquest. They do not need surface resources. They do not need territory. They do not need recognition. From that perspective, surface humanity is merely a temporary phenomenon, loud, chaotic, and destined either to transform itself or to fade away. What makes this hypothesis uncomfortable is that it mirrors how humans treat other species on Earth. We do not communicate with ants, not because we cannot, but because we have no need to. We observe, study, occasionally intervene, but rarely consider them equal partners. If Agartha views us in a similar way, then their silence takes on a very different meaning. Part 7 does not conclude that Agartha is benevolent or malevolent, a savior or a manipulator. It presents only a hard truth to swallow. Silence is not always a sign of absence. In cosmology, this is called the frightening silence. In this story, it may be a deliberate silence. And when an intelligence chooses to remain hidden for so long, the final question is no longer, do they exist? But, what would force them to appear? Every great story ultimately leads to an unavoidable moment, the moment of choice. Not the choice of whether to believe or disbelieve, but the choice of how we confront the possibility that the world is more complex than what we were taught. After all the hypotheses, data, testimonies, and scientific gaps, Agartha is no longer simply a city beneath the earth. It has become a mirror reflecting humanity itself, our fears, our longings, and the limits of our understanding. If Agartha does not exist, what does this story say about us? It reveals a species haunted by the idea that it is not alone, that beneath the familiar surface lie deeper layers yet untouched, a persistent unease. Perhaps we have never truly controlled the planet we inhabit. But if Agartha does exist, even as an isolated ecosystem, a withdrawn civilization, or a silent observing intelligence, the consequences of that truth would surpass any scientific shock humanity has ever faced. It would shatter the central narrative we tell ourselves, that we are the pinnacle of intellectual evolution on Earth, that history began with us, that no one else was here before. Throughout history, whenever a new truth has undermined humanity's central position, the initial reaction has always been denial. Earth is not the center of the universe. The sun does not revolve around us. Humans were not created separate from nature. Each time we lost a piece of illusion, but gained a broader view of reality. Agartha, if confirmed, would represent the greatest psychological displacement of all. Not because another civilization exists, but because a civilization exists that has chosen not to need us. This raises a question deeper than science itself. Is humanity truly ready for the truth, or merely enamored with the idea of it? We often claim to desire truth, yet history shows that humans love truth only when it does not threaten identity. When truth challenges power, belief systems, or social order, it quickly becomes something dangerous, sensitive, or in need of control. If Agartha were revealed, it would not be merely a scientific discovery. It would simultaneously be a political, religious, cultural, and philosophical event. Systems of belief would tremble, structures of power would be challenged, and the first reaction would likely not be enlightenment, but chaos. Perhaps that is why, in a scenario where Agartha exists, centuries of silence are no longer difficult to understand. Sometimes concealment is not born of malice, but of an awareness of what premature revelation can cause. A sufficiently mature civilization may understand that truth is not always a cure. It requires timing, context, and an audience that is ready. So where is the final threshold? What would force Agartha, or any hidden intelligence, to emerge? Perhaps not scientific advancement, but moral crisis. Not when humanity travels farther into space, but when it learns to restrain itself. Not when we become stronger, but when we become less dangerous. Or perhaps such an emergence will never occur. Agartha may remain forever in the gray zone, where science has not yet reached, but imagination cannot fully take over. And in that case, the true value of this story lies not in whether Agartha exists, but in the questions it compels us to ask ourselves. Do we truly understand the planet we live on? Are we humble enough to accept that we may not be the center of everything? And if another intelligence is observing us, is what they see worthy of stepping into the light? At this conclusion, Agartha is no longer a place. It is a test of perception, a question suspended between science and philosophy, between fear and hope. One day, science may close this door completely, or it may open it at a moment from which there is no turning back. Until then, Agartha remains, not as an assertion, but as a reminder. This world is far deeper than what we can currently see. And if this world still holds unnamed depths, then every question you ask today is a step into that darkness. Subscribe and follow the channel to continue journeys of exploration where science and mystery converge.